shift focus. A two-day gender summit has come to an end today. Various civil society organizations, including traditional leaders, faith-based organizations, took part in the summit. The big question, however, is whether do these gatherings of this nature help gender-based violence survivors. For more on this, we are talking to the Under the Rainbow Executive Director, that is Sarita Ranchod, who joins us from our Cape Town studios. Thank you so much for joining us, Sarita. So, a summit, people, you're always worried that it will be a yet another talk shop. But this one was built to be to actually seek solutions. So government and civil society and others who are active in fighting gender-based violence coming together and bashing out solutions. In your view, did it achieve at least that objective?
I think we have a mix of feeling hopeful and a certain level of cynicism, because our new president has a habit of calling summits as talk shops, and so we really do want to see action from people who attended the summit. There is a certain amount of hope in terms of things changing. I think what we need to see now is the actual action to have state accountability to women, which is something we've not seen over the last many years.
We'll get to the issue around state accountability that you raised, which I think is really important. But I want to perhaps ask you from a perception perspective at the very least. Was it powerful? Was it meaningful to you that, we heard some horrid stories that were coming through that were being shared by women at that summit. And in there, you had the president and the Speaker of the National Assembly sitting through these and actually listening to them. And of course, you then had the silent protest, which was staged by some women in there. How powerful was it in terms of focusing the spotlight of the most senior leaders in the branches of government?
Look, I think firstly it's important to note that this particular summit was called by civil society, and it was a demand that civil society made to government to have this summit. The fact that the president and several senior members of parliament and other powerful leaders sat through the testimony is extremely important for really understanding the reality that many women are feeling in terms of how the state has not accounted to women. At the same time, many women were triggered by the testimony, and there was a lot of concern about what happens after these women speak for the women themselves who actually testified, as well as for the millions of women who have gone through very similar experiences who have been listening. So from many women, they were actually able to listen to only some of the testimony because it was so awful and it related so closely to so many women's and girls' experiences. So I think at some level our society has no idea of how widespread violence against women really is. The fact that the president was there, that he listened, that other leaders were there, we are hopeful of that. What we need to see now is action, especially in the context of a national debate about budget cuts. We know that when budget cuts happen, oftentimes the poor are worst affected. And historically, women have not been a priority of the state to date, arguably. So let's see how budget cuts speak to action on violence against women. It's also an election year coming up, and so the ruling party in particular is being challenged to act on women who make up more than half of the country's population.
Yeah, and you're saying historically women have not been a priority when it comes to the state in terms of the things such as budgeting. The one activist, there's an activist who was there at the summit, Nyiko Shikwambane, who put it in this way, invoking that moment of cross-examination where the lawyer in the Timothy Omotosho trial asked the witness, Cheryl Zondi, how many centimeters did the accused penetrate you? She then took that and used it quite powerfully and asked the president, how many centimeters long is the political will to end gender-based violence in South Africa? Do you have an idea what the answer is to that question?
I think it was a very pertinent use of that particular usage by Doberman, because where was the prosecutor during that case? Why did the prosecutor not intervene to stop that lawyer triggering that woman who survived violence in that way? The fact that he was allowed to continue that way, I think it's powerful that somebody actually challenged the president and say, how many centimeters long is your commitment? And I think that is actually a challenge back to the entire power structure of our government. How many centimeters deep is your commitment, and can we see it in action, in resources, in budgets, in accountability to women?
Resources, budgets, accountability to women. What practically, Sarita, would move us forward, certainly in as far as resources are concerned? So things such as the Tutuzela centers and the Kuselega facilities that are meant to attend to people who are affected by violence, particularly domestic violence. What does the president and government, what do they need to do to show that their commitment to this is actually deep?
So one of the things that is important to note is that most organizations providing services to women who are survivors of violence, including their children, and also to LGBTI people who are at the hands of hate crimes, those spaces are often donor funded, which to me means our state has not prioritized service provision appropriately, and so it is actually overseas people's tax money that is paying for our inequality in the very, very violent context within which we find ourselves. So yes, we do have these centers, but at the same time we have women's organizations, we have rape crisis centers closing their doors every day because of budget cuts by donors. So where is the state's money when it comes to supporting, preventing, responding, being there for women when they are faced with these kinds of situations? And so I think we need to actually start looking a whole lot more closely to government and really keeping track of where it is meeting its commitments and where it isn't. Some of the examples of how we are not accountable. I was just going to say, yes. For example, our judges, our criminal justice system, our police, our healthcare workers, those are some of the people who do not often take women's reports seriously, who tell women this is a domestic issue, go and deal with it at home between you and your husband. They show no understanding of the Constitution. They show no understanding that at least formally we enjoy equality. The reality is that we are not equal.
So just a final one then, Sarita, to you. How will you be holding the president and the government he leads? Because, of course, this was a presidential summit, and therefore accountability ultimately should lie in the highest office in the land. How do you plan to hold him accountable to some of the commitments that were reached at this summit, and what deliverables will you be looking for?
I think women's organizations are going to be keeping a very close eye. I think the fact that this particular summit has had a lot of media attention, we would encourage young people who have access to social media, who have access to all kinds of media, to start keeping an eye and to start reporting in different ways. If our police system fails us, let's make it public. When our criminal justice system fails us, let's make it public. Let's hold the various offices within the presidency and outside of the presidency responsible for supporting women's rights and ensuring women's equality accountable. And I think given the timing, it's election time, we are asking you to act, to serve, to protect. More than half of us are women, and we have the vote.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarita Ranchod, thank you so much for talking to us. That is Sarita Ranchod of the organization Under the Rainbow, and she is the executive director there.